So we'll just call this work session to order. Ding, ding, ding. So Kate sent out our agenda, I believe it was even earlier today, of what we're trying to accomplish tonight. So mostly to educate us newbies, and I'm the old timer here of a year, to go over the budget build and the governing documents and things that we need to understand as we go into this budget development. And then hopefully we'll have some time to have a conversation with the board. And John, I know this is important, as we've talked before, about developing some budget guidelines around for Kate and the staff, to us to help them based on what we think and developing that kind of thing. So I want to have that discussion. I'm going to look to you to help me with facilitating that part of the discussion, and Aaron, or anybody actually, would be great. So, Kate, I'm just going to turn it over to you. We're already 10 minutes behind. That shouldn't count against me, but I know it does ultimately. Are we good? So Kate can start with overview of all of our governing documents and what we're supposed to do in this process.
So one of the key things that we wanted to do for you all is to provide an overview of where staff really, where your staff gets its guidance from how we're building a budget. And it's primarily situated around governing documents and any board resolutions that we have. So it's a Robert and Kate show tonight until toward the end, where then we want to get your input and give us guidance as to what we should be thinking about as we're building the budgets. But tonight's more informative of kind of how we're building it, what are the things that we have to look for. And at the end, as I said, what we're interested in is getting your guidance. As I heard during the training session, and I thought John really put it very well about kind of the budget guidance and what we should be paying attention to. So high level tonight, not showing any numbers that have to do with anything in particular. It's just where we are, what it means, kind of what we're operating off of internally. And important for you to know kind of where in the governing documents we're looking when we put that together. Okay, so would you prefer me to stand or sit? Sitting down's okay?
More comfortable.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Saves my feet. Okay, so first off, board responsibilities, high level, going over that. You're determining long-range mission and goals, establishing policies and procedures. Some of the stuff I am going to read to you, so I apologize for that. Normally I don't do that. In partnership with CEO, overseeing the operations of the organization, monitoring finances, approving budgets and the assessment, approve association programs through the budget process. All of those pieces together and independently, especially when we're building the budget, are very important. So keeping all of that in mind when we're going through this process over the next several months is important in terms of responsibilities. Because as we go through, we might be hitting on all of these different things, and policies, procedures, things like that we need to do, and identifying programs that we want to do, we don't want to do anymore, full 9 yards. Purposes of the association. I have done my best to distill this down to the nuggets. It's been a work in process over the years. I feel like I might have finally hit it today without losing any sense from the deed. Interpret, administer, and enforce protective covenants and restrictions, and preserve and protect the value of all property. That is the number one thing that we're here to do. Really, it's that last piece, preserve and protect the value of all property. That's why Wrestling Association was created. Acquire, own, and lease property to improve, administer, and maintain it in good order. Protect the value and maintain what we have. Assess, collect, and disperse assessments and charges. Goes really back up to the other two, the things that we're supposed to do. Promote the peace, health, comfort, safety, general welfare of members. Nice, big, and broad. That means we can take up things like, gee, we're getting a lot of airport noise. What's that all about? We can go to WMATA and say, what's that all about if you change your flight patterns? Strange enough, but it's broad enough for us to be able to advocate and look at if we need to. Do any and all lawful things and acts for the benefit of the property of the owners and inhabitants thereof. Again, broad, supports the other four. Exercise powers conferred by law to accomplish the above stated purposes. Primary are the first three. That's key. Anything to add? Got it? Did I distill it okay? It's a little bit lengthier in the deed. David, you laughing because I just got it. You're like, wow, they can do pretty much a lot.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It took a while to get it to that state, but I was able to, I think I finally managed. So that's the purposes. So again, that's important to keep in mind as we're doing the budget in 2018 and 19. Okay, why a biennial budget? Because section 5.13B says we have to. Adopt a budget on a biennial basis. Again, I'm trying to distill down to the nuggets that are in the deed. Adopt a budget on a biennial basis containing an estimate of the total amount necessary for the ensuing 2 fiscal years. So what staff have started is they're beginning to build the 2018-19 budget. I like them to laser focus on the coming year, knowing that there are going to be changes in the second year. You never know what's going to happen, in the next 2 years that's going to impact that, technically that third year that's coming up in the second one. So it says build a 2-year plan, knowing that there are going to be adjustments in that second year. Just what the board did last year, when we went through looking at the 2017 budget, we knew that we needed to make some tweaks, and it was important that the board had input on that. So to me, it's not once and done, it's an annual conversation on that.
So Kate, can I ask you a question? It felt like last year, it felt like we did a whole budget review, like it wasn't tweaking. Is that pretty normal for the second year?
Not necessarily. I think that so much had happened during the course of last year with the lake house and everything that went on that I felt with your staff, we all felt it was really important to go back and take a hard look at what we needed.
Okay.
So
that was atypical.
Yeah, it was just an unusual year,
Okay.
and I think we had a lot to address.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question, was does this work for us now? For the staff, for the board, for the association? I understand Dean is hard to change.
Oh, it is,
I'm just asking a blue sky question.
I think it's important to go back and take a hard look at that second year sometime toward the end of the first year. And I look to I've got 3 team members here. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective is, you're building a budget throughout the year. We start with certain drafts and we use best information we have at the time. Information changes all the time, on a weekly basis, on a daily basis.
Yep.
And we update those drafts as we get new information. As soon as we know something, we update it. So when you do the biennial budget, you're basically setting the 2018 and 2019 budgets and you're putting that together. But in 2018, it's worthwhile taking a look at the 2019 budget with the latest and greatest information you have, and then you tweak it as needed.
What restrictions are on us in that second year as we go to look at that budget? Is it a wide open kind of thing, we can make changes and amend the budget? Or are we beholden to something based on the deed saying the budget has been set?
Yeah, I think you can pretty much
do what
change
you want.
everything, yeah.
Okay.
It's really setting it up and saying, this is a rough budget. The next years are pretty good. We've got the latest and greatest information. You should be pretty much on track for that. But you've got a whole year and a half almost before you really hit the next year. Things change. New information.
I think originally the intent was so that members knew for 2 years kind of what they were going to do. Last year what we ended up doing was, I think, when you set the 2-year budget, last year actually lowered the amount so that members weren't charged a higher rate than what they had expected. So I think that we need to keep that in mind going forward when you're doing that second-year budget, that you're not going higher.
So
but there is a cap. I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
But something could happen too, that you've got to react to X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Related to Eric's question, would there be benefits to going to an annual budget, just to put it on the table, rather than this complex biannual process?
So I definitely want to give Larry and Mike an opportunity to weigh in, because Robert answered basically yes to the question. Right. We're going to do it anyway.
Well, first and foremost, the governing documents require the biennial budget, as Kate noted. And to kind of dovetail what Robert said, we do forecasts based upon, we'll go out and get contractor bids, thinking of the capital budget as well, which is a large chunk of it. And, you know, a year and a half goes by, we may get an estimate from a contractor, 16, 18 months, that very well change, whether, you know, the price of gas has changed, all kinds of factors that go into that. And so for us, the annual look is important. It's just right now the governing documents require that it be based on a 2-year, but, you know, as Kate noted, on that second year, you know, do whatever the board's desires are.
Would there be any benefits to just focusing on an annual budget? Change the governing documents and do an annual budget?
I'm not going to touch that.
Yeah, I know. I think that you build a draft. You know, we get the bones for the second year, knowing that we're going to come back and fill in the meat, fill in the muscle and the bone, or you know, the meat of it.
So essentially, every time the second year is an outline.
Yeah.
I think back in the day, wasn't it just they added 3%, 5% across the board? I mean, I think it used to be a much simpler exercise.
Yeah,
where they
we were
really going zero-based budgeting.
We were a sleepier town, yeah.
Well, that's why I'm embracing the.
But I agree. And I don't want to, I wouldn't want us to churn. And an annual budget's a pretty short term, and I wouldn't want us to be too short-termist. I'm just curious about, I just wanted to get the sense of the room about whether this process works for us, that's all. Yeah.
Are you spending $200 to do the budget, to do 2 years, where if you did it singly, it really would cost you $150?
Right.
Like, you know, like, how much per year
Precisely.
actually?
That's the question.
That's the question.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Is it okay if we hear from Mike too?
Yeah.
The only thing I was going to add is, you know, even on the communication side, as Larry says, you know, the second year gives you some parameters, you know, where you're sort of working within, but there are certainly changes year over year, and, you know, a good example is postage and shipping. You know, we can go into next year sort of knowing where we're at today, but, you know, Postal Service or the price of gas could go up in the next year and throw those numbers into a tailspin. So there really is some advantages to kind of going back and looking at them in year 2.
Okay, so 2-year budget, definitely going to look at it annually. I apologize. It's up to Sherry. Yeah.
To answer Mike's question about the 1 year versus 2 years, the board spends an inordinate amount of time putting together the budget. When we put together our 1 year budget and spend some time doing the second year budget at the same time, you ultimately save a lot of time because you have the structure, you have the outlook, and what you're going to be doing is perhaps tweaking some details because of changes in facts, such as were mentioned earlier. But it will take you a lot less time unless there are extraordinary things that take place. And your time is extraordinarily valuable. So you want to be looking at other things. You don't want to be doing another budget from scratch again in the second year.
Well, I've been at this, you know, going, it's my 6th year, and so I've gone through, this will be at least my 3rd, maybe 4th budget cycle, depending on. And so we do spend an inordinate amount of time, and I think that we should ask that question about efficiency and effectiveness. So I've been spending a lot of time urging Danielle on the fiscal committee to let's try to streamline the whole process. Let's ensure that it's clear, consistent, transparent, and that, you know, we really have good data in making decisions. And part of that is looking at the process, making sure the process makes sense.
Just one final, this year, the board is going to be involved in 12 meetings. 12 meetings we're going to have to touch this budget. And then other committees will have an additional 6. So it's 18 meetings total.
So that's a lot. That's a lot.
I just want to put that in
But
perspective.
it is one of your primary duties.
It is.
And
Yeah,
that's, I
I'm
think,
just
is, yeah.
pointing it out.
Yeah, I
I'm not
think-
making a comment of right or wrong. It's like, that's what's involved.
Yep.
I don't know if everyone has the development schedule. I'm sure you're going to hand
I
it
have
out
given
later.
I've given it to all our new board directors, yes.
Well, that's frankly why I raised the question. You know, our meetings go long, and there are many of them. You know, we've got 12 primary board meetings, and then there are additional meetings associated with it. And you're tapping into, you know, professionals at full-time jobs. And so how do we do this in a way that's a little bit more efficient?
Let's get off the second slide for now. So,
Okay, you got it.
no,
I'll
my
work on
question
it.
really was around, last year was the tweaking year. For me, it wasn't about tweaking, it was a full-on, but I think since we have such a new board, we should go through this. I've never been through this part of the budget bill, and so I think we kind of leave it as it is, and we kind of go through this, and then we'll see the tweaking year the next year, and then we can make some more educated discussions around.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, fiscal committee is getting more and more efficient, and so, anyway.
Okay, so just wanted to touch on that 2 years briefly, but what's going into it is paying the cost of management and upkeep of the common area. Remember, going back to the purposes, that was the number one piece, value, protection of value of property. Upkeep of the lots. Now, this is anything, any property that's subject to the deed. So this is that exterior maintenance, you're making sure things look good. That's from Covenant's side, from our own side, even commercial properties, roadways, all of that. Next that's going into that is the cost of all other expenses to be found in the best interest of the association. That's when you're really building a budget. These are the things that are going into it from an operational standpoint, even from a capital side. Budget is to include reasonable amounts necessary to provide a general operating fund. Again, this is right from deed section 5.3B. That's working capital for day-to-day expenses to cover operating losses, and covers operating losses due to insurance deductibles. Hopefully there's not many of those. B, reserves for capital repairs and replacements. And last, reserves for contingencies, potential costs for liabilities that have not been incurred but which should be planned for.
The general operating fund, I've always known you want your working capital for your day-to-day. This next clause, to cover operating losses due to insurance deductibles. Have we ever sized that? Because I know that when we did the analysis of surplus cash, and I'm not looking for busy work, we're just trying to make sure when we talk about surplus cash, really what is our surplus cash? So we know we have 2 million-ish. We want to set aside at least 1 month of operating in case of disaster, people aren't paying. But this insurance deductibles portion is new to me. I don't think, I should have read the fee, but and it's like a very minimal risk, but I don't know.
You never know.
Your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this? Because if we're saying we only need $1 million in its reserves, maybe we need more than 1 month. Do you know what I'm saying?
Okay, what's the experience been with deductibles?
It's not been that much in terms of claims that have been made against the association. We'll have 2 or 3 a year at the most that I'm aware of. There may be minor ones that are handled out of the deductible, but for the most part, it's not that substantial.
This is under 100,000.
I think it was there primarily for the purpose of clarification, making sure that the board knew that it had that ability.
But we do know what the exposure is, right? We know what our exposure is on that. The deductibles,
I mean, assuming you can quantify that, right?
yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
Assuming everything fell apart at once,
Right.
what would it be?
Yeah.
But I think that's the chances.
It's a good question, but
It-
because we're going to have something like that happen.
Right.
In around 2 years, I can't really even think of major insurance.
It is
That's-
interesting, and this,
I-
yeah.
Someone put it in there for a reason. But
Yeah.
this is the
So-
first time that I'm like,
That's been considered, really considered.
One way of judging whether we're overprotected against such contingencies, especially for lawsuits, is to do a risk analysis, and I assume that's been done. And, not just the number of risks, but the probability of the risks and the severity of their impact. So we've done that, and have we done that, and does that offer guidance in knowing how to size that contingency fund?
That's what Creech is all about.
Yeah, and
Our insurance broker. Yeah.
stay tuned for the next fiscal committee meeting. Creech is going to be there with the next year's proposed insurance costs.
do you think you could ask him that question? Is that quick?
Because I
Now,
think
quick
in
answer
analyzing
versus 10 hours?
the size, the sources, the probability, the impact, probable or possible impact of the risks helps us quantify
never perfectly, but, you know, what our reserve should be.
Yeah, John's dead on that, yeah. Just, we can come at a actuarial number at least. It makes sense to us.
And I would think that would be
Yeah.
a standard thing as well.
Yeah,
Should be.
Yeah.
Should be.
So you're gonna get that in two forms. You're gonna get that in the insurance side, and you're gonna get that on the reserve side.
Right,
Okay, so there's a whole reserve study that goes behind what if you have to.
right.
Yeah.
So there are two sides of that house.
Yep.
More to come on that.
Okay.
So that's what section 513B talks about in terms of biennial budget and what we're supposed to be collecting money for. How is the assessment determined? Section 55B of the deed talks about that. It says that the board is going to fix the rate annually. So that's one of the key responsibilities that you have. It's the most important thing you need to know about that section of the deed. Is that something that happens annually? It can happen as late as December. Preference is at least November. Love to do it sooner than that. If you guys are ready, if you come to a place, okay, we're comfortable with where we are, where the assessment is, we don't have to do X, Y, and Z. It really depends on your level of comfort with the information and any changes that you're making. We've been in, I can say 5 years ago, it used to be December. It's been November. Hate sending out a bill at Christmas, around the holidays. Love to do it prior to that. October, we love that situation, if we could. Understand that there are some implications internally if we're like, yeah, our goal is to hit November. Robert and his team then have to mentally kind of, okay, what's that look like in terms of production of information and assembly of data to get it out to all of the different places, but doable. But if that becomes a budget guideline, a goal for the year, knowing sooner rather than later would be helpful to Robert and his team if we were going to send it out sooner rather than our normal time frame of mid-December.
That's true statement. The other thing to also remember is the more time you have to assess what's going on during the year, the more information you have, the more monthly actual numbers you have to put into an next year's budget. Think about it.
So how regularly do we do a cash flow analysis? Is it ongoing so that we know what has been happening and what we forecast will happen?
Yeah.
Which helps us, I think, nail this down better.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. On a monthly basis, we produce financial statements every month, really starting in April. This month is really the first month, and we use the first 3 months as data. So the fiscal committee meeting that we just had the first 3 months of data. Why we do that is we're busy putting the annual financial statements together in January, February, and March, and we then take a look at the first quarter. We then have we have monthly financials from March all the way through to the end of the year. And each month we have updated actuals, and we compare that to budget all the way through June. Once we hit June, we have 6 months worth of data, and we then move over to projections. So we don't track against the budget, we then say, okay, we've got 6 months worth of data. Where do we project we're going to end up at the end of the year? Once we've got that, all the departments move on to a projection basis and to see where they're trending. So a department might be trending under budget in certain line items, and it might be trending over budget in certain line items. And what they then do is they project for the rest of the year where they're going to end up. In general, what we try and do is not go over the original budget, but if we do, we try and take one line item and give to another. So that's the general idea.
We want to manage the bottom line.
Yeah.
I don't want to come back in this room. That's my ultimate goal. Gee, we're over.
No,
Cash flow question? Cash flow?
It answers a lot of it, but I'm wondering whether when we start the year, so we have a budget, so where we say we will end up, we commit to trying to end up at the end of the year. Do we have, and I understand the monthly reporting on actuals, and then after 6 months we kind of project, but do we have at the beginning of the year or do we have historicals to know what the typical cash flow requirements are against which we then measure ourselves in the actuals?
So we do. So every year we'll have certain money that goes in and out per month. And when we actually put the budget together internally, we have it by department, by line item, by month.
Okay.
So if we have a salary expense, we basically break that out over the 12 months. If we have printing and stationery, and we know that there's a lot of printing needed, for example, in the summer months, while all the activities, the majority of the budget items are in the summer months.
So we have good monitoring and warning of looming problems.
Yeah.
Gathering storms or whatever.
Then what I do on a monthly basis, we track to the actual budget, and when the data gets wrapped up for a month, I send it out to the budget owners, and they look at it, and then they eliminate timing differences. So, for example, if there was certain purchases that were budgeted to be made in January and February, and they did not happen just because of a timing issue, then we actually move those budget items out to whatever months that they think it's going to happen. So to eliminate timing differences. So the differences that you'll see on the monthly budgets are more trending towards what potentially a permanent difference would be.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
Sure, I have a question for the board members here, because Kate was touching on something pretty important, is when do we, as a board, when we would like to set that assessment? Do we, as a board, want to try to set that at the end of October? Try to move it up a month so that our members don't get those bills in December?
Definitely a consideration toward the end to have that, or even in the next couple of months to have that decision point when you, as you're being given information where you want to be.
I think certainly that should be our goal.
I agree.
That's what we should be shooting for.
You know, it's a philosophical question as well. You know, do we establish an assessment and then create the budget around that? Or do we create the budget and then develop, you know,
Great
then
conversation.
decide
Yeah.
what the assessment is, right?
Let's talk about that when we get into this. So don't lose that. Write that down so you don't forget.
Well, it's right.
Okay.
Burn in my brain.
So again, section 55B, you guys set it annually. Timing is a question that we can talk about a little bit later. More traditionally, it's been in November, but that's up to you all. How is it determined? Section 5.7 of the assessment, basis for assessment. I'm going to go through this kind of line by line. Basis for the assessment shall be an equal amount for each unit or lot. After filing proof of qualification with the association, owners of lots or apartment units may be granted an assessment reduction provided that they qualify for a real estate tax reduction by Fairfax County, that their units are subsidized by federal or state government, or their units are designed and used primarily for elderly congregate care of assisted living facility and occupied by low or moderate income residents. So there are some qualifications there.
So is there an or after the first two? So it's, so any one of those can qualify.
Correct.
Okay.
And notice it says may, not shall.
Not shall.
That's a key.
Yep.
That's a key piece. So I put something before you in a slide or two we'll go over so you can see what 2017 looked like. Flat rate for everybody, unless certain qualifications are met. Percent cap, very important. In any 1 year, the sum of the annual assessment and any special assessment shall not exceed the lesser of. Special assessment's important. Let me pause for just a second. You've got the annual assessment. If you need to charge a special assessment, it's got to be within the same realm of within the cap. We've never done a special assessment. Because if you do, the qualification is, and when Ken and I were working on deed amendments way back in 2004 and 2005, there's a requirement that you have to go to referendum in order to ask to do a special assessment. We don't want to go there. Let's try and make sure we nail down what we need to do and never have to do a special assessment. But shall not exceed the lesser of a percent cap, 1/2 of 1% of the assessed value of such lot and improvements as determined by Fairfax County, so that's a qualifier. You may get a lot, and I'm going to have Robert give me the example. This year's amount was if a unit was priced below, the valuation could be,
It was $139,600.
so if an individual unit was priced below that, we're going to prorate the assessment amount, but automatically we're required to do that. Or a maximum dollar amount. In 2006, the maximum dollar amount was $461 per lot, automatically adjusted since 2006, beginning of each fiscal year by the greater of 4.5% or the change in employment cost index, the ECI. ECI, the employment cost index, as opposed to the consumer price index, because we do not produce goods. We're a service organization. So what that has looked like over the past 10 years is this. The darker is the actual assessment that was charged, the lighter is what the cap was for that particular year. So in 2016 and in 2017, we did something unique that we've never done before. In 2016, the actual assessment was $705. We used $1 million from our operating surplus that had been built up over the years and put that toward capital. Because capital, and you're going to hear Robert and I talk about this later tonight, we really do have two budgets and two different assessments that get put together. There's the operating budget, and then there's the capital budget. So in 2016, $1 million was put toward the capital budget, which with the combined two assessments was $705, but it reduced it by about $48. So the assessment that particular year in 2016 was $657. Did something similar this year, use $550K toward the capital to reduce it by $27. So technically, we're operating at $719. Just so you're aware of what it is, that's all that's putting out there and what the cap looks like and what that means when you apply that. So in the history of Reston Association, we have never gone to the cap. We've come close, as you can see, within $10 or so, or even lesser, but we've never hit it. I'm going to pause in case there are any questions. Comments, questions, thoughts?
I have one comment that we need to be very cognizant of, is we're spending at that 719 level. We have available cash of about $1 million. Now, if we had no surplus cash, our members would see their assessment go from 692 to 719.
Right, nothing changed.
Nothing changes. So we have gotten ourselves, and I think it was a good decision to give this money back to our members in this way. But we have to be very cognizant of that. One thing that I thought we should think about is to gradually try to narrow this gap. So for example, the first year we used $1 million. Last year was $550. Again, we'll all talk about surplus cash, but perhaps using $250 this year. Again, we're trying to narrow it so we're not using surplus cash, but we're not trying to shock the members into a 692 to 719 and then explain that nothing changed.
Let me
Spend wise.
get on my soapbox about another somewhat related item, and that is, are we really allocating the necessary resources to maintain the assets the way we would want them? And I would argue that we've under-allocated that. And so that surplus may not be a surplus. I would like to take a look historically at the upgrades that we've made to our facilities and sort of what was in the reserve fund and what were the actual costs, and did the upgrade meet the standard that the community would expect?
So Mike, is your question, are we underfunding our future capital needs?
That's what I think. That's the question.
Right, because we have 100-some thousand from road. But really, we want to just get Hook Road up, not make changes major, but just get it up to where it needs to be. Is that 100,000, 150 adequate? It should be more than 300. And that's something that I'm sure.
That is an immediate question, because that's right in front of us. Sure. We had talked broadly that perhaps we're going to consider other amenities at Hook Road and whatnot. But I think the first question is, what's in the reserve fund to do, what's there? We had an obligation to set money aside to keep that facility up. What money is there, and is that adequate? And then look broadly across the community. I look very closely at the tennis facilities, and I just think that we're not managing that as we ought to. So the surplus may not be a surplus.
And we'll do more of an in-depth on capital on May 15th. I won't waste our time on that, but more to come. You will notice, and I was mentioning this to a few of you separately, this is the first year we really focused on capital. We're doing almost every board meeting something on capital. Brand new, never done that before. So you're really going to be taking a deep dive into these capital projects and how we're doing. But I think out of the chute, the first quarter, we're doing pretty good at better managing those projects and the dollars. So it's good. Okay.
May I ask you one more question on that slide? So, in a sense, we've subsidized the assessment rate. In 2016, 2017, how often has that been done in the past, or is this the first time?
First time. 16 and 17
ever?
was the first time ever we've done that.
Because we noticed, oh my gosh, we've got a lot of cash.
At a rate that's pushing up to the cap.
And an important factor is the board made a decision, and for this context, it is important for you to hear this. In 2013, the fiscal committee and the board spent a lot of time updating the assessment and finance resolutions, put some new resolutions in place with regard to the reserve, repair and replacement fund, new capital asset acquisition fund, and investment policy in particular. They worked through all of the policies, but they made some major changes and made a conscious decision that the board needs to do a set aside starting in 2014 of $2.5 million. First time ever that it was a forced savings plan. Instead of what was happening in prior years, is we were only asking for the money that we needed to do that next year's capital projects. We weren't putting anything away. So this was, nope, it's time. Laws had come in at the Commonwealth with the code and all of that to do reserve studies, and there was a reluctance to do it, but they made a command decision. Let's do it. So the first time that happens, and you see a little bit of a whoop, a jump. You see that jump in 2014? That's when that started. So it was like, okay, we've got to put more away than we ever have before. So that's also a result of what's happening in 2014 is that. In 2015 and 16, we're adding a new focus to the organization on land use, too. That's another thing that's happening at that point in time. It's like we went up because we had a requirement for more services. And we decided in 15 and 16 that we're interested in better roadway maintenance. We're eligible to do that per our governing documents. It's not just mowing. We want to make sure that our gutters are clean, that there's edging on the roadways, because one of the things that we're noticing by not doing the grass clippings and cleaning up on the drain pans, that stuff is all going into the sewer system, and the stormwater detention ponds that we have, all of our lakes, are dredging expense. We're having to do dredging more. So by us taking the time to make sure it's cleaned up on an annual basis, will hopefully over time reduce that other expense of dredging. I mean, it's kind of logic on that.
It costs us a couple $100,000 a year to dredge the lakes.
Well, you'll hear a bigger shocking number,
The point is that it's a big,
it's an important expense.
it's a big number.
Yeah.
And there are ways of
Mitigating it if we can.
mitigating that in many ways, and the situation's going to get worse with more development.
And Kate, what year was the rent? The rent increase because we moved.
We moved in 2009 to this facility. We didn't start experiencing that new rent uptick until 2010. We had a year of quote-unquote free rent. Actually really deferred, is really what it was.
So I saw the big increase. People were like, why has everything gone up so much? It was the reserves actually adequately reserving for it. It was the rent was another big one. And then you had just said.
Land use.
It was land use.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then roadway maintenance too. So
Yeah.
some conscious decisions were made, by prior boards to make some changes, and it impacted the annual assessment. So we'll talk more about budget guidance on other changes that we want to make going forward on that. Okay, so wanted to kind of show you the relationship between those things there. Now, we're getting into we've gone from the deed now to your assessment and finance resolutions. So the very first one that we have is the biennial budget development process. There's a little laundry list, checklist that we're supposed to follow, us and your staff are following on an annual basis when we're looking at the annual assessment, the 2-year process. So in the first year, and you're going to see, you already see up here, there's some of this is a little out of sequence. And the reason why, for step 1, where we're considering the level of money, that 1.5 I was talking about was the initial in 2014, that we're going to wait a little bit longer, is we want to make sure, as Robert said, the more we go farther in the year, the numbers are accurate, we can go out and inspect facilities, decide really what needs to be done. Do we really need to resurface this, or is it good? Even though reserve study said, hey, you're supposed to do that in 2018, we're looking at it like, it looks good, let's not waste any money, let's put it off another year. Or, ooh, we've got an issue, we're going to have to address it sooner rather than later. So July timeframe for determining what that set-aside amount is going to need to be is when we're working with the fiscal committee to look at, and you're going to see a little bit more information about this on a 10-year kind of rolling average where we come up with a formula. So Eric, you and Danielle will be an integral part as well as Mike when you see we're starting to talk about that.
Okay, when's the next reserve study? So that
It's 2019.
do you guys know about what?
I'm going to touch that. Yeah, I'm going to
never
touch
mind.
that. Yeah, I promise I'm going to get there. So another step is we develop a budget calendar, which the board did in February. We make sure that members have an opportunity to provide suggestions. Again, we put that in February. We're having our listening sessions in May, last one in June. So we're collecting that information from them. We're going to assemble that for you to look at. Sometimes those suggestions are budget related, and sometimes they're low-hanging fruit, easy to address. It's just a suggestion of an operational thing that doesn't cost us anything but time internally, or a suggestion that comes up or whatever. But we'll get some suggestions that you'll want to consider, and we'll have to figure out how that would fit into the overall 2-year process for the next 2 years. We're going to conduct a work session. We're going to be doing that between now, here's your first one, really through July, and kind of getting all of honing the information and the dollars. And then also, I'm going to be presenting a first draft in the August timeframe. Really going to be going to the fiscal committee first. Robert and I felt we've got a great opportunity. We've got great minds sitting around that table that as we're forming these numbers, we want to road test them and get feedback. So Mike Werner is our co-chair for the fiscal committee who's here tonight. So I found that very helpful last year, even though we were in our second year. I loved the feedback I was getting that Robert and I were putting on budget presentations, like, wow, you got too much information, Kate, you have to distill that down. Very helpful, great suggestions that came from that committee to hone what we were doing. So they're involved all along the way on this. Presenting a final draft hopefully in September, October, November timeframe. If you need to have additional work sessions based on community input. And then again, right now the magic date is November 16th. It can change, it's up to you. Hopefully we're not going to December, hopefully we're going the other way, but at the moment it's November 16th. So high level, that's the first part of that resolution on number 1 year developing a budget. There's again another process for the second year that's more of, hey, if there are any significant changes, I have to bring them back to you, have a conversation with you. We go through a public hearing process, which is what happened last year, a little bit more lengthy. we had a lot going on last year, a lot of conversations needed to happen. The biggest one was the capital and how we need to deal with that differently and setting up a new process for that. I'm going to pause. Any questions on this? Okay. Next resolution is...
May I just ask, what would happen if we do not adopt a budget by the end of the year?
If you didn't adopt the budget, that's
You
one
can't
thing.
assess, but the
You assess
assessment...
at the same level.
Yeah,
Yeah, from the previous.
So it's really the assessment that has the
It's-
hard
Yeah,
deadline.
yeah, hard deadline, we wanted, what are we going to be sending out to our members?
The deadline for that is December? Okay.
That's the deadline for you to get it in the mail.
That's the deadline
What's
for
that?
you all, you've got to set an assessment level by December.
But if
That's-
no assessment is set, you're just gonna send.
692 goes out.
692 goes out in
Yep.
January 1.
Okay.
You want a financial plan behind that 692.
No, that, for sure.
Cool.
Procedurally,
Yeah, yeah.
what's the hard stop?
Yeah, hard stop is school in December.
Yeah.
Okay. Good, okay to go on? Okay, Resolution 3, Repair and Replacement in Reserve Fund. There are several parts to this resolution. Again, it was in place prior to 2013, but it's been heavily tweaked. And a really good piece that came out of a lot of, it was a 6-month process between the fiscal committee and the board in 2013 that launched in 2014. Key points or part 1, reserve study. We are required to conduct every 5 years a reserve study to determine the necessary capital reserves to repair and replace our capital assets. We have to do this. Next time to do this is 2019. Robert and Garrett and I see lots of opportunity for improvement based on how we've done it in the past. But having gone through it for my first time as CEO in 2014, right, yeah, prior, because it happened before you arrived, 2014, what I learned is we're only looking at straight component replacement. We're not taking into account soft costs when we have to go to replace something at all, nothing. If this table costs $5,000 or more, I'm just looking at replacing this. I'm not including any costs, and I'm just going to the lowest level of hiring a consultant to make sure the cover's right, fits in the room, and all of this. All of that wasn't considered. I'm doing a really low-level example, but you need to consider those things going forward. So that's an added factor. So during the course of 18, Robert and Garrett and I are going to be really working closely together with the fiscal committee to come up with, here's what we want to bid out to have a firm come in and help us. So that's one of the 2019 numbers in the financial plan, that we're going to plug a number in there, but that might change depending on what the RFPs are that we get coming back in 2018. I think the last time around we plugged, I think it was 50,000 to do that reserve study. That number might change depending on what our desires are, right? Yeah, on that.
Okay, you said you saw lots of opportunities for improvement. Are you talking operationally, that this is how we're going to do it, or are you solely talking about this cost was left out and this cost was left out?
I feel like we've put in place the opportunity for improvement, and we're already seeing the benefits of that internally. Operationally.
Yep.
I am concerned that in the past, we were not asking for all of the right numbers to get a correct reserve study amount.
So
Yes.
they're
That's my
asking
concern.
for
Yes.
estimates
Agreed.
on permitting and
Yes.
any possible tree
Yes.
removal or whatever.
Things, let's put that contingency fact that we're missing. So I'm concerned about what we've reserved for in the past, and we're going to need to think on a bigger level. We'll know in 19.
One of the things that, one of the things we came across, I think it was late last year, is there was a certain asset that we put on our list, wasn't actually our asset.
Yeah,
It wasn't a large amount, it was $4,500.
but
still.
that's still,
That's a thing, yeah.
that's going,
Yep.
So we possibly be
Yep.
paying for something
Yep.
for years for no
Or there's an asset that is ours
Mhm.
that we had never had on our books.
Like
And a pathway.
In front of North Point.
So it's like, this is why it's great to have a capital team who can look at all this stuff. Make sure, are all the things on the list ours and what's missing?
Right.
Let me give you a really interesting example that is going to end up on the list is we have the Wheelie Avenue overpass. That's that concrete walkway, right?
Yep.
Never been cleaned. Had some minor maintenance. Has it ever been looked at structurally to make sure it's sound?
Right.
That's a, factor, right?
Owns it.
We own it.
Just want to be clear,
Right,
because
and
there's a
that's the
trail
key.
right
Yeah.
beside it
That's
the
done
county
not by
owns.
us, right?
But it looks like it's in poor repair, and our community members, they frankly don't care. They just want it
They want to make sure,
to
yeah.
be in good condition.
So lots of scrubbing. It's- Pull up, Kate, pull up. But I want to be frank with you. These are the things that we're paying real close attention to. And I've got a whole team of people now a good team that's kind of laser focused on making sure that we get it all right.
But I also think this grew from very small RA, very nice little RA, everything was new.
Right,
It was okay,
right.
now, focus is on, it has to be right. The ship is really being righted, I would say.
It's a process. It's a process, but
Absolutely.
it's necessary. Okay, so reserve study every 5 years translates into what we call a 10-year look ahead. 10-year, so we're looking ahead 10 years. What do we need to do? What is it going to cost? We come up with a rolling average. Back in 2013, we were looking at 14, it happened to be 2.5 we wanted to set aside. Okay, that's the average. What was it last year?
It was 2.8.
2.8. Could change. We'll look at it again in July. We'll be collecting that information. We'll work with the fiscal committee to take a look. Capital team's out looking really carefully at all the items, working with Robert and all the other stakeholders internally. What do we need to do? What do we need to do in the next 2 years? What's coming in the 8 years thereafter?
Yes.
Knowing that in 19 could be a completely different picture after they get done with their reserve study. So,
Okay, how did you determine in your example that overpass was ours? If we didn't know it was ours how does that come to be?
interesting story. Eve Thompson, a couple of years ago, Mike will remember, hounding me, Kate, it doesn't look pretty when we're driving by. It looks dirty, this, that, the other thing, this needs to be cleaned. Staff's like, great, yeah, we're gonna have to close the roadway, we're gonna have to power wash, ugh, we don't wanna do it. Eve's pushing, rightly so, it doesn't look good. Staff, I said, because technically it ended up on my laundry list of goals for this year. And I was like, okay, find out how much it costs. So we've done some bidding. It's gonna cost us about, I'm gonna be careful on that, when I go back, about $25,000 just to power wash the thing. Maintenance director, Mike McNamara, says, hey, I kind of feel like we need a structural engineer. Because I see a little bit of concrete peeling off over here. Kate, there are lights that are on that overpass at foot level so people can see. I'm not sure they work. And first question, are we sure we own that? I knew that we did because many years ago, that was the only place in wrestling we could hang a banner to advertise camps or pulling tennis passes. We couldn't do it on the Wheelie overpass. We didn't own it, but I knew we could do that walkway. So I knew it was ours. We confirmed it, and it was ours. And then it was, have we ever reserved for it? No. But it's important. We put it on it. We gotta look at this stuff.
We found a pathway this year. One of my residents called, he tripped coming home from North Point and said, you've got to fix this. Well, it's not ours, it's Lerner, it's the shopping center. Well, it was a little back and forth, and it turns out it was ours.
Sorry.
But that's going back and looking at all of the assets. Who owns what? Question on lighting up by you. Who's doing what and what's the right thing to do? It just takes research and time
Yep.
and getting it right.
Yeah. Okay, next slide.
Okay. He's still stuck at.
More of this in May.
Yeah.
Another bullet
Yes.
on that slide?
This is why spreadsheets
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, we're good. No, we're good. I'm going on to more of this particular resolution. Key points, part 2, funding designation. Dollars for the repair and replacement of the association's capital assets and lake dredging expenses are maintained in what we call the triple RF. Triple RF is used for existing capital assets and lakes dredging. Monies from the triple RF cannot be used for operating expenses or new capital assets. So we could not have, I'm going to use an example. We could not have used money from the triple RF to buy lake housing. Balance in the triple RF needs to consist of an annual appropriation from current assessments. This is the new piece that kicked in. A minimum annual balance and an amount for contingencies. We're going to get more in depth in that when we talk about capital. I don't want to take your time on that, but Robert's got all those numbers and we do capital. He'll be able to go through, here's where we are.
We cannot use money from the RRF for new capital acquisitions. The board at any point can move and say, all right, we have too much here, too little here. You guys do have that authority to say, we're going to move money out of the RRF and put it over here for this purpose.
Or the surplus cash,
Goes, yes,
triple
exactly, goes
RF
both
to
ways.
pay for the bridge across Wheelie that.
Our
wasn't
brand
in
new
the-
bridge.
Not brand new.
Our new 4-year-old bridge.
Oh, by the way, you hadn't heard about that bridge yet? Sorry. He was having a heart attack overnight, I didn't even see it.
Is that on our
You're
insurance
like-
I'm sure
policy?
our insurance company does, but that's.
No, I know, yeah. Thank you for the reminder.
No, I'm really pleased
Gotta
that
tell
several
insurance
years
about
ago, the board put in place this resolution. What you're hearing is that over time, there have been gradual improvements. And you take one step, and then you realize there's still more to come.
Yep.
Now, that's really why I'm pressing on the Hook Road, because it just highlights the challenge that we've got with triple RF. Because most of the assets here are now coming 40, 50 years old.
Yep.
And, I just learned about the bridge. I didn't realize that we owned it. But there are lights on there that haven't been working for a long time. We go across that bridge.
Those aren't Dominion lights, like a lot of the others.
That's a good question.
That is,
That's a good question.
could be a concession, right?
That's why we keep the ugly lights in our neighborhood.
Because they belong to the
They belong to Dominion.
Okay. Keep that, so that's part 2 on that resolution. Part 3, funding sources. You can use any one or a combination thereof, and we're talking about triple RF. Investment earnings, annual appropriation of the current year's revenues, equal to that 0.1%, so you assess for it. Borrowing, allocating surplus dollars, which has been done in the past couple of years toward funding that. Or designate that you're going to put less than the set aside amount. So far, you guys have not done that. And that's okay. Avoided that, but that option is there if you so choose to fund it in a lesser amount. Okay, I know, it's there, just inform you of that. Okay, last, and we're going to move on to new capital asset, another resolution, number 9, new capital asset acquisition fund. This is for stuff we don't have. I'm going to go through and give you an example from last year. CARF, as it's affectionately known. We have ARF and CARF. That's how we internally remember these things. So CARF is for new capital assets. Segregated from the operating fund. No funds from the CARF can be used for operating or repair and replacement. Trying to separate everything out. The board can allocate dollars from assessment, non-assessment revenue, or other cash surpluses. It's ways you can fund new capital assets. I know that's it on that last point, right? I'm not hitting that, right? So, perfect example is, hypothetically, we were gonna get a lot of snow this year, right? And staff, your staff is very cognizant of making sure that all walkways are open and accessible to people who use them to get back and forth to their jobs or to get to school or whatever. Particularly in the South Lakes District, where we felt the pain, the past few years. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. That even though it's not ours, we went through the process of getting county authority to come in, a permission to come in and clear walkways. And it doesn't fit our bombardiers, our snow removers, because those are too big. We would have killed the grass, just torn things up. So we needed something smaller. We didn't want to have to hand shovel, because that's more hours. Kate, we need a snow blower. How much is that thing going to cost? Ooh, it's over the $5,000 capital mark. It's going to become a capital asset. We have to ask permission for it. We don't have it already, so it's a CARF item. I've got to ask for the board's permission to get that. Boring item, but important, and if we wanted to take care of the volume of snow that we had this year, the team wanted to be ready. It worked very well in the tiny little amount that we had. We've had a fortunate year. Who knows what we'll get in future years, but that's where that came into play, and that's where that trigger came when I came to the board in November, December, and said, hey, can we? I'd like to use operating surplus to buy that snowblower.
How are these two funds established? Are they deed governing documents, board action?
Combination thereof.
So wasn't it often card board action? You're saying?
Board action, but authorized by the deed. There is a section in the deed, and Ken will get it faster than I will, that talks about reserve funds that can be set up. So, yeah, authority comes and then more clearly delineated through resolutions. Definitely an opportunity, and the fiscal committee's kind of working on this, on defining that operating surplus fund a little bit more in parameters on that.
Right. 514.
Section 514 of the deed is what authorized.
Right, it's deed authorized, board established, those two. Correct. Thank you.
So, your staff are going to constantly come back. Okay, according to the rules, we've got to come back to you and ask this question. Robert and I, without even talking with each other, have decided that as soon as something comes up, we're going to let the board know, fiscal committee know, as soon as possible. You saw that example last night.
Yep.
Our goal is to make sure, the example was, he and I are seeing at the moment that we're going to run out of funds in October timeframe for Lake House.
Right.
How do we want it? We need to start thinking about what mitigation tactics we want to do on that. It's only March. Things could change. We could have more money coming in that'll take care of that. But just in case, we're going to start having a conversation as soon as possible.
Yeah.
We don't want to do what we don't. We've got a new chapter. We want to do a different way. So you're going to hear from us sooner rather than later. Now, at this point in time, I'm going to turn the clicker over so Robert can talk to you about what it's like when we're building budgets and the things that we take into account.
Right, so away from the wordy stuff, we're going to do a little bit of flow diagrams here, and just some of the numbers are we're going to pull the budget. So we're very, very hard. Right, so let's take a look at a flow chart.
Robert, all of this is in the Dropbox?
Really? I couldn't find it.
I haven't yet put this presentation.
Oh,
I can
it's
do it
gonna
right
be-
now while we're sitting here if you want me to.
It's up to you. But we want you to pay attention to him and
Go ahead.
don't look ahead.
Everybody will pause the
We
presentation.
multitask. And we're,
Right, so let's summarize and see from a flow chart perspective, looking at revenues, funds and expenses. Right, so we've got our assessment revenues. I think everybody knows what that is. Everybody gets the assessment invoice. The other revenues are non-assessment revenues. So you can think of an example of a non-assessment revenue.
Pool passes.
Yep.
Oh, I shouldn't answer, I'm sorry.
There we go.
Pool passes.
Pool passes.
Yeah, got it.
Something else?
Camps.
Camps, there we go.
Gifts?
Yep. What about tennis passes?
Proffers if they grants.
Right?
Usually, yep. So the main ones we have,
If Ray were here and Eve were here, they'd say disclosure document fees that they have to pay in order to get that information.
that's one of the larger ones. Covers administration, design and use, RV boat storage, camps, aquatics and tennis. Those are the larger non-assessment revenues. Okay, so you put those together and you get your annual revenue. From there, we've got a few other things on the go here. So let's take a look.
Robert, is it important to say that assessment revenues are 80%, just to size it? 80% of revenue. 80%.
Yeah, roughly.
Sorry.
Right, so we've got assessment revenues, non-assessment revenues that come to our total revenues. And then what do we do with that? Some goes towards the operating fund, predominantly for our operating expenses. Remember what Kate's saying, there's basically two budgets. So there's an operating budget and there's a capital budget. So the operating budget is obviously for our operating expenses, and then we've got the RRF and the CARF, which is effectively combined together to be our capital budget. So hence the two budgets. So again, just to reiterate, RRF is Repair and Replacement Reserve Fund, and that's for the repair and replacement of existing capital assets. And CARF is the acquisition of new capital assets. Any questions? Research?
That would include the lake house. New capital asset.
Yeah, although there was a whole loan set up for
We didn't use them, right?
Didn't use it.
Typically, it's new capital is only about 100,000.
Okay.
So to size it
Well,
again,
they're very
operating
clear.
costs are 15 million, the reserve is about 2 to 3 million.
So new capital is typically new vehicles, equipment. It's rarely anything more than.
It depends.
Well, it depends. So, like you say, new vehicles, if we've got a fleet of, let's say, 5 pickup trucks that we use, and we replace those, that will come out as an existing.
Okay,
we
so it's a
explain
combination of
this.
two.
But if
depending
we
what it
don't
is.
have a snow blower,
I was gonna say the snow blower.
the snow blower would be the new asset.
Right.
as such.
We bought buses for the lake house.
That was new, so that would have come out of CARF.
Correct.
And so we've only had the CARF since 2014. So at the moment, it's been low amount. Who knows what the future holds? CARF could be a bigger amount than 100,000, just depends. But yes, the example to Mike's point, Lake House was considered new capital asset, so we were looking at it from that perspective. We just happened to pay for that with a loan as opposed to existing.
Where does that loan sit?
It's on the balance sheet at the moment.
So the
But-
interest,
The interest, yes.
Oh, the interest that would, we're already accounting for that in a separate.
Okay.
It's an operating expense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there would be an item, getting back to the lake house though, in ARF that covers repair replacement of the lake
Future
house.
stuff.
Future.
Because now it's existing, now it lands in.
So we're theoretically actually setting money aside for the maintenance as opposed to how we may have been operating in the past with our other assets. So we talked earlier that it was straight replacement, it didn't cover all of the permitting or all the other stuff. Right.
On
With the
the
lake
reserve
house, we
studies.
think that we got it more in line with what we're gonna need in the future.
So what we'd have to do is, remember we're talking about the reserve study?
Mhm.
If it's on the reserve study, the money should be
In the
in
triple
off,
R.
triple R. If it's not on the reserve study, it should come out of off. So what will be added to the reserve study would be the lake house
Mhm.
in the next go round.
Okay.
So,
to your point, yes, I think that they have adequately reserved for the lake house. This is brand new. Kate and Robert were in charge and they knew it's gonna be this much, we're gonna have to.
And we knew we had gaps in some of our other assets for ensuring that we were saving enough in reserves for those particular assets.
We're just beginning that now.
Yeah.
That's the kind of the realization was
Right.
coming in 2015 of, whoa, we haven't been doing this appropriately in the past. We need to change our methodology and model. So that was coming in 2015 of the realization of, okay, we gotta change
So it's
this
like the
up.
first thing that we're starting to put on that model.
How many thousands of assets do you have in the reserves. But I mean, it's a, it just is,
Yeah, so it's a document,
it's a monster document.
it's literally like that thick. It's
The one from my little cluster is still like, it's quite big, and it's just a seasonal cluster.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing, your reserves in
Yeah.
the cluster, I'm sure they don't have soft costs in there. If you have to
No,
replace a
not
sidewalk, it's just the sidewalk.
Some are being smart, and
We
it's
have some of it
interesting.
budgeted in ours, estimated cost to repair and all that.
We've got
Based on
some
your
clusters I'm hearing are beginning to, hey, we
Yeah, I
need
think
to start
everybody's
budgeting.
waking up a little bit
Yeah.
on this.
Yeah,
So far, we've been able to stay pretty close to it.
Yeah, good.
that's good. That's good. I'm sorry, Robert.
All right, any more questions on the slide? All good? All right, so the budget process. So we've got a 5-step process over here. So number 1 is determine the minimum transfer amount to RRF per assessment finance resolution number 3. So that's that 10-year average. We're not going to get into too much detail on that right now. That's the 1 step. Next step is calculate operating expenses. Okay. So again, 2 budgets. Step 1 is really referring to the capital. Step 2 is the operation. Calculate non-assessment operating revenues. See what we're going to end up with that. And then using the above figures, calculated the needed assessment revenues to balance. So you've got revenues on the one side, and you've got expenses or outflows on the other side. And then it's really solved for X. What should the assessment be?
And is the majority of our non-assessment operating revenues, do those come in the summer?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
A decent amount come around March, April, because
Okay, so
people
it's-
starting to
okay.
register for camps, buy full
But by
classes.
the summer?
Oh, yeah.
you've-
But
That's what
by
I'm
the
trying
end
to
of
figure
summer,
out.
most of
September, come September, we have a picture.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
what I'm
yeah.
trying to figure out.
Yeah.
It's interesting that finance is, I mean, aquatics is your biggest revenue line, and then right next to it is finance.
Right, so number 5 is estimate capital expenses based on reserve study and staff proposed capital project list. Now note this, and we'll get into a little bit more detail on the next slide. Number 1 and number 5 are very similar. Number 1 is the amount is set aside for the RRF using the 10-year average. Number 5 is the capital list for the year. I'll get a little bit more detail with that on the next couple of slides. Any questions on that? So let's put some numbers together for that. All right, building a $100,000 budget.
It's a hypothetical.
Hypothetical. All right, so step 1 was transfer to RRF fund. Calculate operating expenses, so that's really your outflow. Work out what your non-assessment revenues are going to be. And then what would your assessment revenues be? That's effectively balancing it out. So let's put some numbers with that. Let's say, for example, the transfer to the RRF fund per the 10-year average is $15,000. The operating expenses works out to be $85,000. Your non-assessment revenue, you've calculated to be $20,000. What is the balancing amount? So what is needed to balance? So, number there is $80,000. So that's what the assessment revenue would need to be. Right. So we'll come back to this number on the next slide. But let's talk a little bit about the transfer to the RRF fund. Okay, that's that number there. Right. So let's pause and take a look at that. The transfer to the RRF fund is the 10% average of the next 10 years reserve study. Okay? At the same time, Resolution 3 says set that amount aside. So that amount gets set aside, the 10% average. But every year, we come to board with a list of projects or capital projects. In our example here, our capital repair and replacement list is $15,000. This happens to be the same amount as the amount transferred to the fund. So the net effect of that fund over the year is you put in, or you transfer $15,000 to that fund. So it's like taking $15,000 and, or equivalent, put it into a picture as such, and then you take out $15,000 of expenses on your capital list. Okay? So the net effect, assuming you get through all your $15,000 in projects, the net effect for that year for the fund would be zero. But what happens if you have a different number on your actual list? Your resolution 3 still says your 10% average, which is $15,000, that hasn't changed. But your list in the next year in 2018 is less. So you're putting in $15,000, but you're only taking out $14,000. So the balance in the fund over the year increases $5,000. Now why are we going to do that? Well, in future years, you may have this effect. The capital list might have more than your average. That's why we use an average. So in the last example there, the $16,000, you'd be putting in $15,000, but you're taking out 16. And the whole idea of the average is so there's not a big spike one year in the assessment related to capital, and the next year, because the list is lower, that's a big dip. So it smooths the assessment out. Any questions on that?
That's why it's so important to get a good fix on what it costs to maintain those assets, all costs, right?
Over that long time.
Over that long
Yes.
timeline, so that you've got a smooth assessment.
Yep.
So this is what we're paying attention to as we're building with you as we go through the next few months.
And I think at future budget presentations, we actually will get into a lot more detail on the actual list and
On the
the
capital.
average and the next 10 years.
And that's key because, as Danielle, I know will distinctly remember as well as Mike, is when we were doing this for 16, 17, and 15, the capital list was an afterthought. It was, hey, here's the list, okay. But it wasn't, we weren't laser focusing on what's on there and what does it mean, what does it look like. You're going to have much more involvement in this year.
Well, that's why I said it was really, it's been a journey, and it's been forward and positive progress in trying to get a handle on this. You know, we've heard from the community, they're concerned about the assets that we've got, dug into it a little bit, have some experience on actual projects. We're not setting aside enough.
Yep.
I also think a big part of our conversation that it's easy to gloss over before is what is in that spend.
Right.
Make sure to go line item by line item and make sure you understand. That makes sense. Where did this request come from? Is it reserved? Or are 90% of our members saying we want to have this now? And then also try to keep your ear open. If your members are saying we really want this and you don't see it, have that conversation. I know Kate gets back like that.
So there's
Send an email.
there's a whole list of projects that are due in a particular year from the reserve fund. So it takes some judgment to look at those projects and say, do they really need to be done now, or can they be deferred, right?
Or maybe
And
one that
then-
is in the future needs to be done now.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And you also want to be taking a look at the backlog, which I think is going down. So there's
Yeah.
more components.
Yep.
Many more components. But yes, very important. Keep in mind, you're really approving 3 different budgets here.
What is the value of all of our assets, just to put that on the table? We know our budget is about 15, 16 million, but if you were to,
Can we come back to you with that? We'll
Is it on our
definitely
balance
answer.
sheet?
Because I didn't bring any of that with us today.
Don't you
But
walk around with your
I wanna
financial
be-
statements?
I think it was, yeah, Dan, I mean, I'm gonna, if I recollect, it's about 45 million.
that's what I.
But that was, that's about that.
Yeah, so you got a chunk of assets Probably
isn't.
Now that you ask.
But with lifespans and with the cyclical cost of aging,
Precisely.
and that's the thing that has to smooth out over time,
That's
right?
right,
You know.
that's right.
So I just want to do a time
Right.
check,
Yep,
because
Yep.
we were only
Yeah.
supposed to go till 8:15.
yep. And
Could be a hell of a 15
we are nearly finished.
Yeah, we've got about 2 pages.
2 pages to go, and then it's up open for comment.
Any questions on this?
Yeah.
No,
Any
that's okay.
questions?
All right, cool.
Right, so let's go and calculate the assessment, right?
Yes.
We know what the total, amount is per our previous, slide was $85, that's what we needed in assessment dollars. So if we had a membership base of 1,000 folks and everybody paid the full assessment, okay, well, the assessment would be $80, right? Pretty easy. But, in our example here, we remember some folks get tax relief, some get limited to the cap, so not everybody pays the full assessment. So let's work through an example. So let's say, for example, 850 pay full assessment, 100 receive tax relief, and this paid 50% of the full assessment, and 50 own properties under the threshold. What would the assessment be, or what would the equivalent units be? Right. So that 80,000 would equate to 935 full assessments. So that's as if 935 paid the full assessment. So you really need to solve for that, and because not everybody pays the full assessment, the actual annual assessment in this example would be more than the $80. It would actually be $85.56, because you've got to account for so many in tax relief and so many in hitting the cap. So that's really how you end up working out what the annual assessment amount would be. Any questions?
Your current equivalent units is 21,000 what?
668. That doesn't fluctuate too much.
Until we have new units come online.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Correct. So, on average, out of the 21,600 members that we have, from the apartments, there's 4,132 apartments. Of that, 2,120 pay the full assessment. Tax relief apartments is 464, and then 1,548 are subject to the cap. On the non-apartments, the 17,486, only 118 of that actually fall below the cap amount, but they pay an average of 76% of the assessment, or $528 of last year's assessment of $690. Sort of.
So getting back to my earlier philosophical question, you created the budget based on operating expenses and revenues. Could also determine an assessment level and then turn around and create the budget from that.
You could. It is a little bit tricky though, because you are working out exactly then, you're kind of backing into your number. Is that can theoretically be done, but is that the right way to do it? What's also pretty tricky is we don't really know. We use the October or November Fairfax download of the property values to actually calculate what the actual.
That's probably a relatively small number.
Yeah, and it hasn't really changed.
Although property values are going up. So we've had some units who are not falling below that cap.
So I'm sorry, when did you pull that report? When is that report available? Because it might prevent us from setting an assessment in October.
So we usually use the one closest to November with the latest and greatest information. So we have the ability to get those on a monthly basis.
Oh, so you
And-
could get in September? Okay.
But what happens is the county does tax assessments throughout the year, and sometimes, they just don't assess a certain area until a certain time period. So that area may lag behind the assessment.
Did we get that right, David?
I think that's right, yeah.
Okay.
It's like in mine about every March, they've already, worked mine out. But you say it's a rolling thing through the county. Because mine is March, just happens to be, that's where I live and they did mine in March or so.
And it doesn't really change that much. In 2016's assessment, it was 116 properties fell below the cap, and then just changed to 118 this year. So it's a very
So
small.
if we wanted to forge ahead, we pick a conservative number of full-time equivalent or whatever,
Oh, yeah.
not FTE, that same model, thank you, right? And we can march ahead and then, got it. Okay, fair enough.
So, now on to the meat of the discussion. Does this help? Okay, so the intent was to give you a base from our governing documents, resolutions, how we get to where we are. But here's the most important, well, I'm sorry, let me give you an example. Something that Robert and I forgot about this slide, something that Robert and I put in here because we really do this year, when we're building the budgets, want you to think that we do have two budgets. A third, if you're going to do new capital asset. But let's pretend we're focusing on existing stuff. You've got an operating budget, and you've got an equivalent assessment amount. This 2017 shows you some new stuff we wanted to talk to the board about. Land use consultation is an example in that $9 equivalent. And then you've got the capital amount, and that's the assessment amount for that. Combine that together gives you your full assessment. So when we're building the budget together this year, focus on operating, then focus on the capital. And know that they're going to be combined together to come up with the assessment amount. But you're really looking at two budgets. You're going to be discussing and approving two different budgets. Maybe a third if you're going to do something new that we don't have in terms of an asset. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's going to be the mantra going forward because we've slammed it all together before, and I think it's important that we split it apart and make sure we're focusing on one budget at a time. Good? Okay. Now, budget guidelines. As your staff is working now behind the scenes to put everything together, starting to build things up, I think it's important that we kind of, and I know you're going to give us continuous guidance, but what is it now? You say, Fulkerson, you need to pay attention to this right now. I already have a little laundry list that we've already started working on internally. What else? What else is missing? What guidance do you want to give us to be thinking about as we build 18 and 19 over the next couple of months? Before I turn it back over to Sherry to lead the discussion on this.
Yeah, I mean, we only have a few minutes, and I think this is a continued question throughout each of our budget training sessions. So we heard a lot of information tonight, which may help tweak or change or make us think about things a little differently or what have you. So I know, John, that you're getting ready to go out of town, so I certainly want to hear your guidance or things on your mind as far as we move forward on this, because you won't be here for some of the next sessions. And then open it up to anybody else who has some initial thoughts. Given that if we don't end at 8:15, these two guys are going to both throttle me, so we have about 5 minutes. So John, I'd like to turn it over to you if you have some initial thoughts.
So budget guidelines, this concept is very simple. It's to spare everybody the pain and wasted time of staff going off and developing the budget without any constraints, and everybody gets frustrated, angry, and wastes time. So it's a simple concept, and there are many ways to help set budget guidelines. And you can use different tests. So these are numbers, I'm sure you all have done them on your computer just the way I did. But like I did assessment histories, So, you know, what is, and everybody's done
I
it.
just love you.
Huh?
I just want to say that. I just,
Well, I'll pass it around, and it's got beautiful colors to look at, even if it looks like nonsense. So it tells us that, you know, that on average, you know, our assessment has gone up, with the exception of 2007, by 3.77%, 3.8% per year.
Starting
The median was 3.37. So, you know, it's in that range, and I noted what was the high one, what was the non-zero low one, and so one thing. So that's one piece of information, and we all hear and continue to hear that we don't want it going up all the time. The second one, and this is a test that we can apply. It doesn't give us the answer, but it's a test to help find the answer, is what was the Consumer Price Index CPIU over the same period? And it was about, I thought I converted it to percents, but it was about 2.1% per year over this roughly the same period. So one test that many municipalities use is, okay, let's look at the, you know, where the CPIU is going to go next year, and not permit, I mean, these are the fiscally conservative municipalities, and say, we will not go over that without a justification, a specific justification minimally for going over that. It's not the final budget guideline, but it's a test, you know, that, and citizens understand. If inflation drives costs up, we understand that. If it's a lot beyond inflation, they don't understand. So it's a test, it's not the answer. And at the bottom, I just kind of did a projection, you know, if we continue to grow at, this really belongs on this sheet, but I did it later, so it's on this sheet. So, I mean, if we continue to grow at 3.8%, using the, and I did not use the real base, but I used the effective base of 692. So it's kind of the subsidized assessment. If we use that as the base, you know, we would be by 2000, you know, by 2028, we'd be over 1,000 a year in assessment. So I mean, these are just kind of letting the numbers talk to us and suggest constraints we may want to do it.
Or maybe flipping into the ECI because Kate talked about.
Right.
Use that as opposed to CPI, whatever, yeah, same concept.
And the other thing, it strikes me, one thing I hate people who say, we'll just do across the board cuts, because it treats numbers as though they're disembodied, and they're not, because they're connected with real services and real facilities. And, you know, that treatment of budget numbers as abstract numbers is really dangerous, I think. So we have to promise we'll not do that. But I think that we have to always look for value, which is the ratio of benefits to cost. And we want to make sure that we're always getting the greatest value, which drives us to seek efficiencies. Mm-hmm. So value is one of the things. Affordability is the second criterion. It can be great value. Yeah, I could find a really good price on a Rolls Royce. It's really a good price, but I can't afford it. I can only afford a Civic. So value is not enough. Affordability is another principle that we have to look at, and that's affordability for us as an association. But we have to keep in mind the affordability for our members. And so, and then a final thing that I think we need to look at, and you've heard me use the term before, and you'll hear me use it again, is the common good, which is not the greatest good for the greatest number. It's not the utilitarian principle that will do the greatest good for the greatest number, because that means you can really screw the smallest number, do the greatest evil for the smallest number. So common good rather means that our goal is always the flourishing of each and every individual of the community, but realizing that flourishing of the individuals can only happen if the community as a whole, so they're not isolated individuals. We don't help Millie out and then turn to Jake and help Jake and turn to Sally and help Sally. We're striving for Jake and Sally and the rest of them to flourish, but we do that by building a community that where it works. So that notion of common good, and so when we choose capital projects, we have to really say, how does this, how much does this really reflect the common good? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No?
So those are kind of things that I've come to look for in setting budget guidelines.
So using your guidelines here, your parameters, for the better word.
Or tests. I'd rather call these tests because they don't tell us what the parameters should be.
You're looking at a assessment of before we add value, before anything, if you're just using these numbers, the range would be 709 to 718. So last year we charged 692. A 2.5% increase is at 709. Or if we were to use the 3.8 historical resident association growth, the other check point would be $718. So you're saying we just keep these?
No, well, I'm saying, I think but I go back to the broader principles of value, affordability, and the common good. So I think value drives us to say, how can we achieve greater efficiencies that might allow us even to lower it? How can we be efficient? And affordability, can we afford that? What is it doing to our reserves to subsidize our assessment this year by such and such? Or what is the impact of higher assessments to our members? And then the common good. Are we sharing the burdens and benefits of membership fairly? And I think all of those can help at least give us principles with which to, does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's my approach, and I like what Eric does, his agency does, because it explicitly ties budget levels to levels of service.
Yeah.
Again, it avoids disembodied numbers.
So, John, I think that's a really nice framework for us all to think about. If we think about the things that are important to us, whether that's a capital project or whether that's whatever that might be, if we think about it within that framework, as we come to our next budget training session, we might be able to have even greater conversations. But I think we could all agree that, how do you disagree with these as a framework? And then, of course, the tests are always good, because I love this kind of stuff, and I know Danielle she immediately gets a calculator out when she starts seeing numbers like this. And so it's the idea of testing against something that is explainable or that the general population accepts. We know what CPI is, we know what inflation is, and it's like
It's our job to do the other stuff, to do what you were saying.
Yes.
As far as getting the message out there, it needs to be quick.
Yep. But I like this kind of strategic thinking about when we talk about any one of these potential projects that might be on our budget for 2018-19, does it meet, and the conversation could be around these three fundamental values.
And others.
There are, but
we'll
this
have
is,
other principles,
but it's a good start for us. Budget meeting number one, budget training session number one, and so with that, I think that's a nice place for us to conclude, unless there's any final comments. Kate?
I just want to give you a flavor of the next one, that's all, and then, anyway. So the next session on the 15th of May is much more intensive. What we're doing is giving you an overview of 2017, how we're doing against plan, and any thoughts we have that are coming down the pike for 18. We're also going to give you an overview of all of that some of the non-assessment stuff, kind of those recreational programming things, what pays for itself, what doesn't. Just to give you an overview of that in 2016 numbers, just so you can see how we ended up in 2016, where they were. So staff's busy working on both of those. A little bit more of a flavor of capital you're going to get, because it's due, it's a deliverable to you, is kind of what our 5-year capital look ahead is, strategic plan for that. So again, a lot of information really to prepare you for the month of June, when we get, during the course of May and June, when you're hearing these member requests and thinking about that framework. Very much appreciate that guideline of value, affordability, and common good for us to take back and utilize in our internal discussions as we're beginning the building process. So, I mean, if you don't mind, I'm going to use that. We've
Well,
got a
I
senior
can
leadership
send you
team.
the text that I.
That would be awesome.
Here, I'll send it to you
Great,
electronically.
that would be great, because we've got a senior leadership team meeting tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about budget, and this is great guidance for us to
Can you
use.
push out what John's giving you to us?
Absolutely.
I can, I
Can you send it?
have.
Great.
Yeah, I'll send it.
Maybe put in the
Well done.
Dropbox.
No, do email me.
Just an email.
So guys, thank you for your time and attention and conversation. I think we're on a good path. And you guys for putting together the presentation.
This was
As
really good.
painful as it is for a non-numbers person, it was good.
Thank you, Madam.
Yes.
So we're adjourned.
Great, thank you. And
And I'm gonna